And we are live. Welcome, folks, to episode 3686 of the Survival Podcast. It is a Wednesday, June the 11th, 2025. And since it's a Wednesday, you know that usually means we're going to have an interview, and today's no exception. And today we're actually continuing the Meet the Expert Council series that Chef Ken kind of kicked off with the idea when he asked to be on the air and kind of angled it from that standpoint. And some of the council members that you are used to hearing on the Thursday shows have been on the show, once or twice, or even a few times, or even a lot of times. Nick Ferguson, Nicole Sloss, things like that. But some of them have never been on the air with us, other than as doing the expert segments, 5 to 7 minutes. And you really don't know who they are and all the things that they can do. And I thought this was a fantastic way to get more connection in the community. So thank you to Ken for coming up with the idea, but also to help me help you and help them help you. The more you understand about what these folks do and what they can offer you, the more questions that will come in and the more content we can create for you. So that's why I'm going to have Ryan Steva, the Homestead consultant, on today. I met him through Nicole Sloss, and he's an awesome guy. You guys have heard some of his segments, some really useful, innovative ideas for the Homestead, down to brass tack stuff that just works, explained in a way that anybody can understand and then you can implement. And if you want more than that, he's the kind of guy that you can hire to do consulting as well. And we'll talk about all of this today and more as soon as we bring Ryan on. First, let's go ahead and take care of our sponsors of the day. Sponsor of the day, number one today, is John Pugliano with the Wealthsteading Podcast. John is one of us. He's a prepper. He's a gardener. He's a ham radio operator, and he's an all-around good guy. He's also an investment manager and a damn good one. And he does a podcast every week, roughly every week, called the Wealthsteading Podcast. It's a short, down and dirty podcast, runs about, on average, 10 to 15 minutes. The highlights of what's going on in the market, what he's doing with his money, which is also what he's doing with his clients' money. He manages his money and his clients' money the same way. But I don't know if I've ever mentioned, he has a little newsletter you can subscribe to for buy and sell alerts. You receive free stock market commentary along with the buy and sell notifications of what he's actually doing, trading in the market on an ongoing basis. And if you just go by wealthsteading.com and click on buy sell alerts, you can see where to fill that out. I really recommend you do that if you're not already on his mailing list. And I promise you, he ain't going to spam you, because the guy, he sends a couple, 3 emails a month like this, only when he has something important to say. Next up today, Start 9 Sovereign Computing. The idea that your data or whatever it is that you think you're storing or accessing is in the cloud is absolutely nonsensical. As dumb as Kamala Harris said when she's like, it's up there in the cloud. It really is that stupid to believe in something like that. That's just somebody else's computer. That's what that means. You're just on all your data or all your information, all your pictures, whatever it is, are on somebody else's computer. But how would I access them from anywhere in the world when I needed it and I wasn't at home? Well, with Start 9, you can do that. You can also run a Bitcoin node. You can run a Lightning node. You can run individual custom applications for you and your community. Like, how about completely encrypted end-to-end private messaging that not only is it encrypted, well, unless you invite somebody in to use your server and set up an account, they wouldn't even be able to find it. Access websites from all over the world. Access anything you want completely encrypted, completely protected, completely privately. Wow, this sounds complicated. Do you use a phone, like a smartphone? Yeah. Do you install apps on it and use apps on it? Yes. Then you can do this. I would say, like, the Bitcoin Lightning node is the one thing that takes some expertise in balancing liquidity. The rest of it is stupid easy. You should get one of these today. If you buy it with a Fold card, gift card, you get 5% off. And if you're an MSB member, you can stack that with another 9% off. So check them out today. Start 9 Sovereign Computing. Remember, there is no cloud. There's only somebody else's computer. And if you really value that data, do you really want it on someone else's computer? Does that really seem like a good idea? Probably not. So check out Start 9 today. With that, let's go ahead and introduce our special guest, Ryan Steva, the Homestead consultant. Ryan, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks, Jack. Thanks for having me on. It's about time.
It is about time. I sent an email to all of you guys, man, and I'm like, hey, let's get the form filled out. And some of you drug your feet. You got on it pretty quick. So You're ahead of a lot of people in getting on for this series.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
So let's start off with how you got into what you do, your current lifestyle. From your notes, and this seems to be a common theme. I'd say there's two most common genesis points for people on this show. First one's not you, and it's I found Ron Paul, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the other one is you had some sort of life crisis, usually health related in some way. And for you, it's the second one. Can you kind of talk about how that led you to your current lifestyle?
Yeah. So when I was in my mid-20s, early to mid-20s, I was on vacation with my wife in Florida, woke up one morning to the phone ringing, tried to get out of bed, and ended up just barely managing to fall onto the floor, pretty much completely paralyzed, full body paralyzation, could barely talk, could barely breathe. And I had no idea what was going on. So got to the hospital, kind of got better over a few days, eventually went home and started digging. And, this is back when Google used to work and you could actually find things, real information. And so I figured out what was going on with me, at least to a large extent, changed my diet from the standard average American diet to something a lot closer to paleo and high protein, low sugar, low carbs. And basically I felt better than I had any other time in my life. I've been a fairly high level athlete in high school until I messed up my knee. So I started realizing that just by changing my diet, I felt better than I ever had. And fast forward about 9 months, I put in an application to get into the Mayo right away because I was living in Minnesota. And I got into the Mayo and I started talking with doctors there and ended up talking with the world leading expert on my given condition for about an hour. Well, he kind of tiptoed around all these not telling me what all these great medicines that they were figuring out to treat my condition were. And finally, I kind of cornered him and just said, what are the therapeutics? And he goes, oh, well, they're laxatives. I'm like, okay. And by then I had figured out that my condition was due to, they called it a genetic condition, but I had figured out that it was due to mineral deficiency. I believe specifically chromium and vanadium and some others as well. Causing potassium not to get into or to be sucked out of my bloodstream. So when he said that, I knew it was complete BS and that he didn't know what he was doing. And by then I knew if I followed his advice, I'd be in a wheelchair within a few months for the rest of my life for some temporary relief. So it was like this, eyes were open, realized, the medical industry was not what it claimed to be. The world leading expert at the Mayo Clinic was giving me advice that would leave me completely debilitated, probably dead very early, over something that they don't understand and some random redneck with internet access could figure out. So it really broke my illusion to the medical system. And then when that illusion was broken, it started to break my illusions about the food systems because I'd already started digging into that a bit. And then, that cascaded into the financial systems and political systems, and it all just kind of crumbled. I mean, I've always been a bit on the outside libertarian side of things. But, I believed a lot of the conservative tropes that aren't actually true. And this kind of just crushed everything. So while I was still in Minnesota, I went and tried to start my own garden because I was like, I need to start producing my own food. I think the first thing I tried was some stupid thing off of Pinterest at the time was a big deal, and it failed miserably. So, of course, being somebody who loves to research, I started digging into, what makes a garden successful. And I gardened in the ground before, as a kid. But raised beds and pallet gardens and all those things were interesting. And of course, on Pinterest, they're just showing you pictures of basically giant pepper plants that they transplanted into these gardens because they wouldn't have grown. So anyways, that was my next thing, was deep diving into how do I grow my own food? What does it actually take? So, I made a big mistake in the beginning, but fortunately it was a very inexpensive mistake and just kind of grew from there. Basically making my life more resilient, less dependent on systems that seek to basically suck us dry.
And, a lot of people have similar stories, maybe not quite that dramatic, but very similar in that something in their life led them to seek better health, self-reliance, self-sufficiency, take control of their diet and their food, and change their living conditions.
Mm-hmm.
Only a few go to the point of, and then help other people do it too.
Right.
How did that come about? How did you end up helping others set up and improve their homesteads?
Well, so once I got to Tennessee about 10 years ago, I had what was supposed to be a great job in basically account management, helping some really huge clients, basically with access control, closed caption or closed circuit TV, things like that. And what it ended up being was a bait and switch, and it became basically a cold call sales job, for which I got fired because I wasn't meeting my numbers. And so I had this kind of cascade. Then the next job ended up, the company went bankrupt within 1 year of me being there. And then I started working for somebody else as a home inspector, got my certification and things. And he had a health crisis and wasn't giving me any hours for about 9 months. And during that time where I wasn't getting any hours from him, I just started helping people with like handyman jobs, and a few of those people started asking me about homesteading and wanting to get into like hemp growing, because that was a thing at the time. And I helped several people save hundreds of thousands of dollars, avoiding some of the major pitfalls with hemp production that I saw coming with the boom glut bust cycle. And I realized I could save people a ton of money, a ton of time. And because I was seeing this happen over and over again with people I was helping, I'm like, well, I could just make a business out of this and reach more people and also provide for my family at the same time. It's kind of a win-win. So that's when I opened up the Homestead Consultant as an actual business, and kind of tried to formulate some ways that I can help people in a meaningful way, and in a way that really helps them avoid some of the big mistakes. And I joke around and say, I made a lot of the mistakes for you, and and so I can help you.
But it's one of those. It's funny because it's true.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that was my introduction to helping people. It was really kind of by accident, because I needed an income, and I just started doing it, and it worked out so well for everyone involved.
So I think one of the biggest mistakes new homesteaders make is they take on too many animals, too many projects at one time, or both. Often, they often also take on animals before they have the infrastructure for the animals. And that's bad. But like, I'm going to get 3 different animal species all at once. That usually train wrecks them. Or I'm going to do these 5 things, these 5 projects. Can you kind of talk about what happens when people do that?
Yeah. I mean, it's extremely easy to hit burnout, to spin your wheels, doing things in a way that doesn't make sense. An easy example would be putting your garden too far from your house. So I see a lot of people do this because they're like, I don't want an ugly, weedy garden next to my house. Plus, I'll get in more steps. Well, as you expand your homestead, you want to make things more efficient. So you'll get in your steps as you add other systems, but you want your garden, and you want these things that need consistent maintenance close to your house to reduce the amount of effort you have to put in, so that you can do more things and get more produce or production out of them. So I see that happen a lot, just a mindset that isn't conducive to stacking systems together. And that's one of the, if we look at Holmgren's principles, he has 12. So I like to reference them because they're easy, because there's not a giant list of them. But some things that I think about when people are taking on too many projects are just thinking through his principles. So principle number 1 is observe and interact. And if you take on too many things, you can't really observe and interact. You're just going to be spinning your wheels trying to take care of them. And if you take on kind of the scientific method of take one thing at a time, one variable, introduce it, see how it works, and then start to add other variables, other animals, other systems, Another principle is number 8 is integrate rather than segregate. So if you're going to do, if you like gardens and you like chickens, put them right next to each other. Then all of your waste from your garden, all the weeds can go to the chickens. If you add in something like wood chips or a carbon source, the chickens will turn those in, make compost, which goes back to the garden. And I mean, I could go on for hours about how you can tie these two systems together. And if you put your chickens on one side of your property and your garden on the other because you didn't know that you can tie those together because you dove into it too quickly, it's a fairly big mistake, and it's expensive to fix. So, and I also like to talk about taking on too many projects or animals like debt. You want to take on one at a time, figure it out, which is kind of like paying off the debt. Figure out how you take care of chickens, how you manage them before you take on ducks or before you take on goats or whatever else. So you can kind of start to stack those things together in a meaningful way.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And the whole idea that you're going to do all the things right out of the gate is generally a huge mistake. And I don't even care if you're well experienced. And even if you did it before, you can then get overconfident and outgun yourself, so to say, going in. But I also think it does make sense to think about all the things you eventually want so that you can prioritize and follow those permaculture principles, like you said, so you can function and stack, right? So like, if the garden is your first step, that's a great first step. Like the location of that garden then becomes kind of a hinge point, like a keystone point for everything else you do. The location of a chicken coop, the same thing. The location of, let's say, fencing or ponds or all of that stuff. It's probably a good idea to not fixate on the total and get overwhelmed with it, but maybe come out with maybe the 10 things that you eventually want on your property that are the most important to you, and then put them in priority. Would you say that's a good approach?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a good point, because I think goal setting is, even though you may not follow those goals exactly, they may change over time. It's like setting a destination on a GPS. You might end up taking a different turn or a slightly different route, but you want to know what your end goal is, because if you don't set those goals to move towards something, you don't have a reason or a mooring as to how to get there. So it's a really good point. And then once you set those goals, then you can think about, okay, if I'm setting these goals, if I want an orchard and I want chickens, it would make sense to put the chickens uphill from the orchard, because their waste is going to run downhill in rain, and that's going to fertilize my orchard. So let's stack these things together rather than putting the chicken coop downhill. So when you think about, or when you set goals that you want an orchard and you want chickens, now you can think about, okay, how would those go together? So that goal setting early on, before you start putting systems in or getting certain animals or whatever, makes a huge difference in the success of your homestead.
Definitely. Not only can people try to go too fast right out of the gate, they can also maybe start out okay and then go, well, I now want to expand. And then they can kind of jump off at that point too quickly too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You can start out on the right foot and go too far. You can get analysis paralysis. So that's kind of the other end of the spectrum, where you get so afraid of trying to do one thing or another that you don't actually try it. So I think there's value once you get one system figured out, introducing another, and not going too far to one end or the other end of the spectrum of, toolbox fallacy or analysis paralysis, where you don't do anything and you don't try anything.
Yeah.
I really love working with clients who are willing to try something a little different. Like, I've got one guy I work with, and most of my clients end up being friends, so I call him a friend, but he figured out how to grow perennially, turmeric and ginger. And between him and I kind of working together, he came up with a full system, and it's worked year after year now. And now he's growing as much garlic and turmeric as a lot of people in Hawaii are growing, because he was willing to try something different, but he also didn't take on so much that he couldn't pay attention to that thing and be attentive to what he was trying. So it's always a balance.
Can you say a little bit about that? I'm intrigued. Perennially growing garlic, or no, I'm sorry, turmeric and ginger, I think you said.
Yeah, turmeric and ginger.
What climate is he in?
So he is like half an hour from me. So we're zone
Okay.
7 in Tennessee.
Tennessee.
Yep,
and
North
how
Central.
is it, like, without giving away the secret sauce or whatever,
Yeah.
like how it was the general macro on how he's pulling this off, because it freezes there. It freezes here. I grow ginger here a lot. I've got some in some ebb and flow beds right now because it sprouts the roots really well before you put them in the ground.
Yeah.
But if I leave them in over winter, they die. So what is he doing?
Yeah. So I actually have the philosophy of really nothing should be secret as far as how to do things. If you go to if people look at my YouTube channel, it's all about like, how do I tell, like I help people do the things I'm doing without having to hire me. So anytime I can empower people. So anyways, to answer your question, the basics are, he has created deep mulch bedding or beds. Like, so we do, compost on top, like basically cardboard, compost, soil, and then wood chips on top of all of that. And we leave it sit over winter. That's the prep. So basically it gets going. And then he plants the turmeric and ginger in the spring of the next year. So once the system's kind of gotten a chance to establish, so we cover it with plastic, like silage tarp, over the winter, let it stay warm. He plants these plants in the fall. He harvests some of like the big nodules that come off, and cuts the leaves off the plants when it's cold enough, when it's just about to hit the first frost. Well below that mulch, we add additional mulch, put the black plastic or the silage tarp back over it until spring. Once it's plenty warm, basically it'll be warm enough for those to start popping up. And I think somewhere right around Mother's Day, we end up pulling the black plastic off. And then a few weeks later, the first shoots come up, and that extra deep mulch that actually breaks down over the winter goes from being really deep and providing a ton of insulation, and the ground contact kind of keeps things warm. And so does the tarp over the top.
And the depth, right?
Yeah, the tarp and the depth of all the mulch, and then that mulch breaks down, especially in the spring as things get a bit more wet. And so the distance that those bulbs have to push up becomes less. And so far, year over year, it's worked great.
That's really cool. I wonder if it would work for me, even though it's not as cold here, since I'm doing 2 foot high raised beds and I can't go into the ground. I'm wondering if I'd retain enough heat, but I'm going to try it. And this is an aside, but I'm going to tell anybody out there, you should consider growing things like we're talking about, the ginger and turmeric, even if you have to do the harvest, store over winter, replant thing. And the reason is that what you can buy in the store is 1/3 of the maybe it's not even 1/3. It's like 1/4 of the value of ginger. So it's mature ginger that needs to be peeled, right? Well, there's also a thing called baby ginger that doesn't need to be peeled, and it's amazing. Then you've got the lower part of the stalk, which has an amazing flavor, and it's more ginger flavor. You use it a lot like you use lemongrass. And then you've got the leaf that you can use like a tea. So there's like these 4 great products that come from the ginger plant, and the grocery store has one of them. And the beauty of this, you go to the store, and I would advise organic for this, just because there may be a retardant applied to non-organic, but you can just go buy ginger root in the grocery store and plant it. And I've had great results taking the roots. They have those little nodules on them where the stalks come up. So identify those and sideways into an ebb and flow bed, and they'll sprout usually within like 7 to 10 days. And they really take off faster when you put them in the soil that way. So but I'm going to try to overwinter it this year, because I think that's cool as shit.
Yeah, it's a great option. And the other thing that happens there is you can start growing ginger and turmeric that you cannot buy in the store. So, I mean, have you ever heard of blue ginger? It's a real thing, and it's pretty cool. And it's very difficult to get, but you can buy roots and start expanding it yourself. So, and they have some of these different varieties, just like, anything else we'd grow at home that you can't buy in the store, are going to have different medicinal properties.
Yeah, I would say that. Plus, even the plain old garden variety ginger, the flavor hit. If the flavor hit from store-bought ginger is a 5, fresh ginger out of the ground, the flavor hits a 9.
Yeah.
Right. It just has so much more punch to it. And the baby ginger is really cool too. just a different thing altogether. In your experience, so I knew you're a creator. You have content on YouTube. You have very real content. There's a lot of, I'm not going to say bullshit. I'm going to say it's fluff content. What you're seeing is real, but it's the cherry-picked best day material, right? People generally don't show you the day the aquaponics pump broke and they lost 150 tilapia. I've shown that happen, right? Like, because it happens. And I think there's a lot of danger in trying to model yourself after your favorite, like, I would call them the Instagram version YouTube creator, where everything's, shiny, happy people and stuff like that. And can you kind of talk about that? Because I know that's not your thing either.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's definitely a danger in the fact that YouTube is going to, and Instagram and these other social media platforms, they have algorithms that will push things to people. And if you're not posting often enough, you don't become noticed. So a lot of these people are posting constantly, but not, you don't have a follow-up. An example would be, I wanted to look into electroculture because a lot of people think that it does miracles. And I had a lot of people approaching me about it. I'm like, well, it might be helpful. I don't know. Let's try to look into the science of it. And there's really no appropriate papers about it. But you see YouTubers going, here's electroculture. It's going to make my crops amazing. I'll show you in 2 weeks. And then they never have a follow-up video. So there's a lot of things that are fake. There's a lot of things where people don't tell you, I'm trying something new and I don't know if it's going to work or not. And so they only show you one side of it. They don't, like you said, they don't show you all the chickens that ended up dead from the bad advice they gave in the last video that allowed, a fox into the hen house. I think it's really important to find people that you can know and trust if you're going to watch things on YouTube. But I think also just building a general BS detector is really, really important too. As you start to do things on your homestead, don't allow for, what's the term for when you Gelman amnesia, right?
Yeah. So amnesia,
yeah. So become the subject expert in a specific thing. And so then when you see your favorite YouTuber tell you that what you know about, like, you see the BS there, and then know that they're probably BSing you about something else. As you build your knowledge, you're going to build your ability to recognize that as well.
Yeah. And I do think there is a lot of YouTube content that is put out more for the purpose of making money on YouTube than educating people.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I don't think it's necessary either. I think that you're an example. You can do both. You can educate people and make money. And I think long term that works better, but people want production quality. Like, the whole purpose of YouTube to me was YouTube, right? Like, this is for us. And we do have, and I'm not going to put it down just because I shoot all my video from behind an iPhone. But we do have people now that they're trying to make everything look like a Hollywood studio produced it. And to me, we're losing something in that, because that is not what made YouTube so successful that Google bought it because they needed to get rid of some cash so they didn't get turned into a mutual fund. It was people really sharing what was really going on in their lives with realism. Yep. And I've always found my favorite creators, especially my favorite creators with homesteading or fishing or anything that's like hands-on things that I like to do, are like the guy that does the fishing video where his rod breaks and he leaves it on there and he's like, fuck it, he throws it in the water. Like, it'd be like, oh, that's immature. No, that's what you do when that happens. You just lost a great fish. You had a $200 rod that you thought you could bet your life on, break in half for no reason, and you're pissed. Why would you edit that out? Like, to me, like, okay, now I trust, this is Angler Up with Brant that did that. And I'm like, now I trust Brant that his fishing videos, when he has a great day, he didn't go out for 9 hours and take fish that he caught over that 9-hour period, condense it into a 10-minute video and look like he had a hell of a day. He actually probably did have a hell of a day when he puts a video up that way. The same thing with, like a lot of creators will show things that are bad days. And those people I trust. And the person that never shows any bad days, I don't trust. And this is why. I've been doing this a long time. You're going to have freaking bad days.
Yep.
Like, there's no way you're recording all the stuff that goes on your homestead and no bad days. That's not a thing.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I've personally had a bobcat that got into my coop like 2 or 3 nights in a row. Right. And I didn't figure out exactly what it was doing or how to stop it until a couple days into it. So I didn't put that on YouTube, but I'm saying that right now, like, we all have loss. We all have attrition. I think last year I got so busy. I let my garden just completely go, and all it was weeds. And, there's a few things, go in and get a few tomatoes, but we got almost no production. And that happens sometimes. That's real life. And it's unfortunate to see, it's part of the business too. I mean, on YouTube, people don't want to watch long form for the most part. They want it trimmed down to be, give me the information now and give it to me quickly. And so there's, I try to put in all the caveats and all the little considerations that I made when I was putting something together. Because I think understanding the details and the nuance to something is extremely important. And that probably hurts the number of viewers that I get and the number of subscribers that I get, but I'd rather help somebody than get more subscribers.
No, I agree. I think that, again, those are the creators that are going to have less quickly, but they're going to have the long duration. Like, they're going to have people that follow them for a decade or more versus, oh, this is really cool, and I subscribe because this guy blew himself up with an M80, right? And then, like, now I'm bored with that. That's all he does is do stupid shit, so I'm going to go do something else. But the person that brings legitimate, educational, informative, and entertaining content, that's somebody I want to hang out with. I think that's a good way to, build a business like you're building, because your primary business is actually consulting with people in real life and helping them develop their homesteads. But, content creation is a great way to prime that marketing funnel and bring people in, a little entrepreneurial add-on for people out there trying to build a business of their own, because it doesn't matter if you're doing what I do or what Ryan's doing. Every business, especially solopreneur, small business, etc., has a marketing funnel that can be built like that. And it's a really powerful thing. And again, this is an aside, but it's going to become more and more important, because it's dying is Google. And when I say Google, I don't mean Google the company. I mean search. Mm-hmm. Search is on a downward freaking trend. I think Google just laid off like a shitload of people in their search department. Right? That's the bread and butter that they built their company on, and they're laying people off because, what people are doing, everybody's using AI to get an answer. But the problem with AI answers, when you say, how do I set up a rain catchment system with 5 IBCs in the chat GPT, it'll spit a bunch of shit out. And if you know how to do it, you go, okay, that's right. That's wrong. That's wrong. That's right. That's terrible. Don't do that. And then you also, like, you would tell somebody, why are you doing that? Right. Are you sure that that's what you want to do? What's the, you'd have a whole litany of questions before you tell them how to do that, because maybe that's not the right approach. Yeah. The people that make, like, an example would be people that set up a rain barrel. Like, so your roof is, one half of your roof's 1,000 square foot. That's 500 gallons roughly per inch of rainfall. And you're setting up a 30-gallon rain barrel. Yeah. Don't do that. Like,
they're setting up downhill from the thing they want to water.
Yeah.
Like, how are you going to get the water there? What have we considered as far as how we're setting this up?
Yeah.
For example, with the rain barrel, if you put a downspout diverter on the way that all of the downspout diverters come with instructions, you put the diverter right next to the barrel. Well, if you've got a 2-story roof, you can put that diverter up near the, just under the gutter system. And now you've got 20, 30 feet of head height where you can actually push the water back uphill to where your barrel is, right? So now you've got passive water pressure by just making a little change and thinking through what you're doing and why you're doing it. And those are the kinds of things I want to empower people to think about, even if it's not that specific example. I want them to start thinking about, what if I make a little change? What will that do? What if I think about this outside of the box a little bit? What will that do? And how can I make that work? And if I try it and it doesn't work, how do I make it work? Or can I make it work? Is this a bad idea, or is it just an idea that needs a little bit of tweaking? So yeah, just thinking through the subtleties of what they're doing makes such a huge difference.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. Then I see another thing that a lot of people do. They either strive for perfection, and that ain't, just let's be honest, with all the moving parts, that ain't going to happen. And then the other, I guess the converse is you get the people that they settle for mediocrity, like just barely good enough. And the thing about systems like this is you want to build redundancies in them because they break, but even with redundancies, they still break. And the more you're like, that's good enough, or the classic, it's good enough for government work, right? And maybe it is, but your house is in government work, right? You don't have fiat money to fix everything. So can you kind of talk about that double-edged sword about like being too perfectionist or being too lackadaisical?
Yeah. I think people generally tend towards one or the other. For me, I have a tendency to be not be super careful with how I put something together on my own homestead. I've got a little bit of the mechanic drives around a crappy car, or, that kind of a mindset, because I can make something work even if it's not really supposed to work. And so I can kind of cobble something together. But then when somebody else goes to use it, they don't know the subtleties of the things I tried. So, that side of it can become a real problem, because now you're constantly trying to cobble it back together. You decided to use pallets to make a gate for your garden, and it keeps rotting and you keep having to replace boards. Well, you're wasting a lot of time, even if it would have cost a little extra to get a real gate for your garden. Now you're wasting time, you're wasting effort, and it's going to break at the worst possible time too. So, prioritizing and building things out, getting your infrastructure right before you bring systems on or animals onto your property is really important. But again, if you spend thousands of dollars putting in a chicken coop and run when you could have done it for $200 and gotten the same result, now you've spent a bunch of time and money that you can't spend on something else. So it really is a balance. Everything is about balancing things carefully. And again, it goes back to goals. What are your goals? If you haven't written those down, if you haven't thought about what those are, you're going to really struggle to achieve your goals if you don't know what they are. So you'll find that balance in writing down your goals and then asking, am I meeting my goals in doing this? And that'll help balance that out.
Gotcha. And I really do think people need to shy away from being perfect, but they really do need to think about like not going for mediocre and really think about like, okay, let's look at this system, right? From end to end, whatever it is, whether it's a chicken coop, a garden, an irrigation system, whatever. Let's look at how it starts and how it ends and everything in the middle. And then let's pre-troubleshoot, I guess, right? What can break in this? And can I install a redundancy? Like we used to run networks back when I was in that space, where we would have basically a ring network with a failover, where if this node failed, well, there's nothing I can do about stuff attached to this node. But then you basically ended up with a reverse ring. And then so that node's down, but everything else stayed up, where if you didn't set it up that way, once that node that was part of the network, the whole thing went down, or everything past it went down. Yep. And I think we can build a lot of things like if this, in my aquatic systems, there's always two pumps, a little one and a big one. And the little one ain't enough to leave there long term, but if the big one dies, I have plenty of time to swap it out because the little one's there. Without the little one, I might go out to see surface breathing fish, and by the time I get the pump in, if it's July, I've got fish floating and dead, and fish that ain't dead yet, but they're not going to recover. Right. That's just one example. Like that is really important in my opinion.
Yeah, and another example of this is I've got a client who I installed basically a water tower for, and the reason I designed it the way I did was they need probably about 100 gallons a day. And so what we did was we took a 3,000 gallon tank, we put it 70 feet above their house, so ran it way up a hill, and we're pumping water from a spring-fed pond into that tank. Well, that gives them, at 3,000 gallons, that gives them 30 days of water on their farm if something goes wrong. So if power goes out, if something breaks, and it worked out perfectly. So systems like that generally are going to have an issue that need attention. And it may be that the person who put it in, like me, who can deal with these kind of oddball technical solutions, is going to be the one who needs to come out and fix it. And in this case, I couldn't get out there for about a week. They had plenty of water. They were just fine because we thought through the design of the system before putting it in to make sure that it had those redundancies in place and that they had passive water to their farm, regardless of whether the pump was running or something else broke.
Yeah. When you talk about maybe something you refer to as subtle design principles and how that leads to missed opportunities or failure when somebody doesn't have an understanding of that.
Yeah. So when this is kind of touching back on watching YouTubers or even watching my channel for that matter, I might not touch on every subtle design or somebody might try to mimic what I'm doing or what somebody else is doing without an understanding of how the design works. An example of this would be Bermuda grass. So when I first got to Tennessee, I put in these long rows, or basically I made my garden really long and skinny because when I was in Minnesota, we didn't have rhizomial grasses, at least not in a way that it would cause a problem for me like Bermuda grass. And when I got to Tennessee, I found out that if I have these long edges, I'm constantly maintaining those edges because of the Bermuda grass. So now I make largely square gardens, or I use chickens to maintain the outside edges, things like that. Where somebody in one region would go, well, why don't you just fill in the blank? Why don't you just make a long row? It would be easier, but they don't understand my subtleties here, or, freezing temperatures. I just built a outdoor bathroom. So it's got a hot shower. It's totally off grid, solar, composting, toilet, things like that. It's for a hip camp. And most of the comments were, yeah, but what are you going to do when it freezes? I'm like, well, I'm going to drain it because the circumstance is we're not going to have campers in the middle of winter. So understanding the subtleties of systems that are designed. Jack, you sometimes talk about, suggesting to a cattle rancher to plant silvopasture.
Yeah.
And they're going to immediately reject because they're going to go, well, I know what happens when I have a tree in the pasture. All the animals flock under it. They destroy the soil. Basically, it becomes an area that's muddy, dirty. I lose topsoil. I don't have any grass there. I don't want to put that all over my pasture. I'll have no grass. And they're not understanding the subtleties of design. How
the cows all go to the one tree because it's one tree.
Exactly.
Right?
Yep. And so if you're rotating your cattle and they've got one tree, it's going to provide them shade. Especially in hot climates, it's going to provide the grass shade for part of the day, but not the whole day. So in those dry, hot seasons of the year, you're actually going to get more grass production. Like, it's understanding the subtleties of the design that are going to make it work. Because I get a lot of comments on my videos. Well, that doesn't work. I tried that, and it's oftentimes, not always. Sometimes it doesn't work in their circumstance, but a lot of times it's just they missed something about the design that's important to understand to make it work properly. And so as you learn troubleshooting, as you teach your brain how to figure out those subtleties, you'll start to be able to put those pieces together, figure out what it is that didn't work, make the little tweaks, and you can make pretty much anything work in your circumstance if you put your mind to it and start to understand how those subtleties affect what you're designing and putting together.
Let's talk a little bit about water flows. I know you're a student of David Holmgren, Bill Mollison, Jeff Lawton, the whole permaculture ethos. And in permaculture, when we look at a property, we look water, access, structure, right? Like that's kind of the first, that's the three things I look at on a property. But water flows through a property are extremely critical. And can you talk about the problems that arise when people don't look at that? Because I think most people do look at access and structure. How do I get there and where do I live in, right? Like, even if they're going to build a house, they think, where am I going to put the house and how am I going to get to where the place I want to put the house? But people, by and large, ignore water. And I mean, they don't ignore water if it's a pond, right? If they want a pond and there's a nice depression that's easy to turn into, they see that. But they don't look at the topology and how water is going to flow, channel, and affect the entire property.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple of things there. One is looking what your actual water sources are. So, you know, a well, a spring, a pond, those are really important, but also thinking about just how the water flows across the property, starting to, you know, go and if you can, I think, Oregon State put out some good videos on their permaculture channel about how water flows and how topography works and how, you know, you can look at topo maps and things and figure out where the water is going to flow 90 degrees off of contour, etc. That will help a ton to start to understand which direction water flows, where it's going to end up, what issues you might create by putting something somewhere. If you're moving the water flow to elsewhere, and you might create erosion issues, or you might place a building right where water's running, and so now you've got a river through your chicken coop every time it rains. Even home builders. I mean, so I'm a home inspector as well. I'm a licensed home inspector in Tennessee, and the biggest mistake and the most costly and destructive mistake I see, and it's probably on 90% of homes that I look at, is there's something called negative grade, meaning the yard is sloped towards the home and it's holding water against the home. The vast majority of settlement is due to water against the home. So just thinking about which way does the water run? How can I divert it properly? How can I keep it on my property as long as possible? You can use things like mini swales, and I've done a whole series on YouTube on mini swales to help people think about how can you move water from one place to another? How can you slow spread and soak that water into your property so you're storing more of it, so you don't need as big of a water tank to water your orchard because you've got a mechanism for that. So it's just vital. Like, we don't have life without water. And thinking about how it moves across the property, it's interesting because water is either the most destructive force on Earth. It's also the most life-giving force on Earth. And it really just depends on how you manage it and how you use it. So water on a property is really, really important. I've got an entire class where my first opening part is I joke that I've tricked people into coming to the class thinking they're going to learn about, you know, tanks and roof water collection, and they are. But I start with how do we store that water like a battery in our soil and on our property, up high on the property, before it runs down, because the hydrological cycle is like a giant energy system, and the water is the battery if we store it properly.
Yeah, and what you were saying about, you know, the location of the building and water collecting on the building is true, but it also can lead people to think incorrectly. And what you're saying is it has to be on the highest point of the property, because a lot of times that really isn't the best place for a house. But we need to think about, you don't want the house in a valley where the water's coming from two directions and can't be diverted around somewhere else. If you're on a slope, you want to pick a place for a site, but then you also want to divert the water infiltrating from behind, and you certainly want at least one side sloping away. My property looks flat, but I'm basically sitting on the highest point with 4 different directions water flows off, and I'm sitting on limestone. So I'm not going anywhere, but you can't always do that. And sometimes if you have really hilly property, putting a house on top of a hill, sure, you get a great view, but you also get like completely exposed to the harshest winter winds, and most likely to have your roof ripped off in a storm. Like, there's a lot of reasons you may not want to do that, but we still need to think about the water flow, even if we're not at a particularly high point on the property. Yeah,
it's because you really, in most cases, can't have the soil sloping away from your home in every direction. On natural topography, what you typically have to do is put what's called a curtain drain, or some people might think of it as a swale, behind the home. So you run an angle of soil away from the home. Generally, the general rule of thumb is a 1/2 inch for 10 feet is the minimum away from the home. So you create this kind of subtle V behind the home or on the uphill side, and then you you make that subtle V go all the way around the house in a channel, and that catches the water and moves it around before it can soak in down to the footers of the home, or get into the crawl space, basement, etc.
Yeah, as I say, especially if you have a basement, then you don't want a pond in your basement, and
Right.
like when people say, "Oh, I have a bilge pump," well, I'm glad you do, and maybe at some point in a serious enough situation you'll need it. But if you need it all the time, something's wrong.
Yep, exactly.
Right? There shouldn't be water in your basement all the time. Something's wrong. The house is in the wrong place. Something needs to be diverted or what have you. The other thing is, you were talking about holding water high in the landscape, and I agree. And one of the really cool things about that is you could take something like a 1,500 or 2,000 or 2,500 gallon poly tank and set up rain catchment with it higher on your property. And even if you don't use it for water to your home, you're not completely off grid. In a grid down scenario, you can feed that water into your home with gravity. Well, if you put your house on the highest point, you're not going to do that.
No.
Right. So you've taken away a design element before you even considered it, because you haven't considered water flow. So it's destruction, but it's also like an opportunity cost in that, because I put this here, and it's a type 1 error now. It's not easy to move a home. I'm not going to say you can't do it. I've seen houses go down streets. I've seen houses on barges go down the Mississippi River, but it's incredibly cost prohibitive. Once you put a house in a place, especially if it's got a basement, you really kind of made your decision. And so now you've put it in the wrong place, and now you can't change it. And if you're buying a place, if it's right every other way, you might accept that limitation. But if you're building and you're buying raw land and building on it, you really want to, you have this incredible opportunity, and it's probably not going to cost you more to build the same house, 50 feet away, but it may add 100 different things of value by doing it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Nick Ferguson talked about this when he was on the show, but one of the things that I do, that he does, that Carrie Brown and others who do stuff like us can do, is save you a ton of money, especially when you're thinking about where to buy a home or to buy a home. I've actually done a combination of home inspection and property evaluation for people at the same time, because you want to know, is that home in the right place? If there's issues with it, can I fix those issues, especially water issues? But there's people I've saved hundreds of thousands of dollars by saying, instead of placing your home, on the back side of the property where you think you want it, if you place it over here, not only will it be, your cost to do it will be tremendously less. Your access is better. The solar exposure is better. Like, everything about this spot is better and will save you hundreds of thousands of dollars and ongoing nonstop maintenance to your driveway. So yeah, absolutely. Those things need to be considered when you're looking at buying a property, and just bringing in somebody. And it doesn't have to be me. I'm not trying to pitch myself. There's lots of people who do this, and finding somebody who does, I have a network here in Tennessee of I think 6 or 7 other guys who do what I do, and we'll bounce ideas off of each other because each of us have an expertise. Like, Carrie is amazing at identifying and marking plants, and that's like his niche.
Yeah.
I'm really good at really technical, kind of uncommon solutions. And people have reached out to me from California, and I'll go, well, let me check with my network, because I don't want to charge you to go out to California if I can find somebody trustworthy who knows that climate and I can get you connected with. So, reach out to us if you've got something like that, and we'll help you if we can, or we'll try to get you connected with somebody if we can't, because, we all kind of, we want to help. And that's why, Carrie does what he does, or why Nick does what he does. We really, truly want to help people. And if we can, we will.
The other side of this is, when you're looking at property, a good reason to use a consultant, if you've kind of narrowed it down or something, is there's also this incredible opportunity in finding a property with a problem. The seller's aware of the problem. Everybody that looks at the property sees the problem. Nobody sees the solution to the problem. And then the proper consultant go, all you got to do is X, Y, and Z. Mm-hmm. And I'm not talking about your real estate. Your real estate agent will always say stupid shit like, just take that wall down. They have no idea if that wall is load bearing at all. There's no, they say it like it's like just waving your hand and it'll go away, But people that actually know what they're doing can look at a situation and go, you know what, you can do this. Here's an example. I don't remember who wrote the book, but I read a book a long time ago, and it was on real estate and flipping properties. And the guy was looking at a property, and it was like a small cabin back in the woods on a couple acres, and it was a really great deal. And before he even looked at it, he asked the real estate agent why it's so cheap. Like something was clearly wrong. And he said, well, it's all off grid. It's solar. There's enough power for everything it needs. It's just a small cabin. And even the well's on solar. But the well is a wet weather well. It goes dry every year when the water table drops about 3 months out of the year. So he goes into his network, and he has a guy that specializes in stuff like this. And the guy says, well, how often does the well produce? And the guy told him about 8 to 9 months of the year. And then it's about a quarter that it's, it doesn't produce. And the guy's like, well, how big is it? He's like a 1-bedroom cabin, whatever. And he's like, so, if you had 4,000 gallons worth of water available to the cabin during the dry period, you wouldn't need the well. So he came up with a solution to put some poly tanks in. And it was a few $1,000s to do it. And then just fill the tanks with the well when the well's full, and then use the battery while the well's empty. Yeah. So he buys the house, flips, and then throws in, probably would cost more now, but I think it was about $4,000 to do the whole job. And then sells the property like a month later at like a $50,000 profit, because someone, and he didn't know to do this. He relied on someone like yourself to point out where the easy fixer-upper was, right? Because either you're buying that property stupid cheap and living in it, right? Or you're doing what this guy did and you're profiting from it because you can see the problem, but you can see something others don't, which is the solution. And once you hear that story, you're like, well, that's pretty basic. But if no one that thinks the way that we do looks at it, no one will see the solution, and that's your opportunity.
Yeah. No, you're exactly right. And when you're in a situation like that, especially in real estate or something, when you've got kind of two people who work in that realm. One is making money on commission, and the other is being paid up front. And I'm the person being paid up front. And so I'm just not going to sugarcoat things or, try to push you into a sale or, and I work with great real estate agents, but they're kind of few and far between. And so, just consider your source too. When you're dealing with something like that, consider who you're talking to and what their incentives are, because that means a lot as far as getting the right thing for you and not getting stuck in something. And on the idea of property and finding solutions, if you're looking at buying a property and I go out with you and look at it, we can talk about, like, I have people send me their goals, their resources, their time that they can put into things, all that stuff in a questionnaire. And then I have them send it to me before I go out on property. And that way, when we're on property, I can go, well, yeah, you could raise rotational pigs through this forest, but as is, it's not really going to be proper for cattle. And we can talk about those things, and maybe that doesn't fit or tick all their boxes, but it fills the need in some other way. So maybe they're able to produce meat, but it's just not going to be cattle. Or whatever the circumstance is.
I think that's fantastic. What about the people that I want to be completely self-sufficient, not rely on anybody, and I don't want to be. I'm with Davy Crockett. If I can see the smoke from my neighbor's chimney, they're too close. I think that is it's a fantastic way to describe somebody in a prepper novel, but it is not really a great way to live.
Right. Yeah. I think I've got one word for that, and that's plumbing.
Okay.
That sounds odd, right? Why? Yeah. Well, let's say you want to get your house that's way out in the middle of nowhere. You think you're all self-sufficient in things, and you've got plumbing run to that house, and it's coming from a spring or a well or whatever. Well, what happens when your well breaks? Best case scenario, you've got some parts on hand. You're knowledgeable about how these systems work. You have the tools, and you go out and fix it, but it breaks again and you don't have all the parts you need. And you're 3 hours out from a major hardware store that carries, quarter inch and a quarter poly pipe fittings that your well takes. Well, now it's 6 hours of driving just to go get the parts. And with plumbing, you almost always get about 3/4 of the parts you need. And one or two of them are wrong. So now you're at 12 hours of driving to get the parts you need.
Yeah.
Much less, probably a day and a half's worth of time into diagnosing, troubleshooting, figuring out what the issue is. And then you put it all together and you found out that, instead of being there was two issues. There was a footer valve as well. So now that was bad as well. So now you're at like what, 18 hours of driving just to get the parts you need to fix this stupid thing.
Yeah.
And you don't have a plumber who will come out and fix it for you.
Or he's like, yeah, I can be there Thursday. And you're like, well, great. And he's like, yeah, the second Thursday of next month. And
right.
It's going to be $500 in a trip charge.
Right. And he doesn't have all the parts either. So now he's back 2 months later with all the parts. Yeah. So just think about how close you are to the things you need. If you're too far out there, now going to church or taking your kids to a sports ball game or whatever is a huge detriment to you. And now you're paying ridiculous amounts of money for gas and wasting time. And so you need that balance. And Jack, you talk about that urban rural fringe where you have access to things, but you have insulation as well. And sometimes that fringe is a little bit further out depending on where you're at. But if you don't have community, if you don't have access to things, self-reliance it's not something that you're ever going to get to 100%. And that's not the goal. You need community. You need others who are good at fixing plumbing if you're not, who are, good at helping you with the roof. And you need whatever your specialty is, even if that's like you're really great at baking pies for people who are, having a bad day. That's important. It's important to have that community, and it's important to have the access to the things that we need on a daily basis.
Yeah. I mean, I talked about it a couple of weeks ago, how when we have like power outages and things like that around here, especially like in the winter, we get brutally cold. People don't realize that. I mean, I'll put it this way. When the power goes out in the winter, it's usually also when it's brutally cold. I'm talking single digits. And in the summer, when the power goes out, even if it's during a storm where the temperature's down, once the power goes out, that's about the time the storms move through. And you know what happens next. The 110 degree heat is right behind it. So you're either extremely hot or extremely cold. And we look out after our neighbors in that situation. But specifically, my neighbors that are one fence across from me that are in their 80s. We look out after them because we can. Well, my hope is that somebody moves in there after they're gone. When I'm in my 80s, that can do that for me, because you can really lull yourself into this belief when you're younger that like you're always going to be able to do all the things. And no, you're not. And then you're like you were talking about trips to town and whatever. Well, now you're going to need more trips to the doctor, right? And imagine being older and it's you and your wife. Let's say the kids are gone. You live out in the middle of nowhere. You've been there 30 years. You love the place. But now one of you is sick and you go to start the car to take your wife to the hospital. It's a 3-hour drive as it is. And the car won't start. And you ain't got no neighbors. I mean, like that's just one of 100 different scenarios that are kind of against the whole, I think what it is, there's this romanticism, and I'm a bit older than you. So I grew up when, like every week there was a new episode of Grizzly Adams on TV. And there is this kind of mountain man fantasy that you're going to move into the. Well, I will tell you one thing about the Grizzly Adams show. Grizzly Adams was not 80. Right? Now, I don't know how old the man with the mule that drug the mule around was supposed to be, but that's a little artistic license there. We all age, and Father Time catches up with us. And I think another thing that we need to look more at, and I've become more cognizant of this, and Nicole Sauce has talked about a lot lately, design the homestead. Yeah, do all the hard work to get the things now, but do the design so the workflow after the design is easy with the fact that you're going to get old as shit in mind. So that you can continue to, all this you've invested in, that you continue to benefit from it as you age instead of see it as a burden.
Right. Yeah. And do it in such a way too, where you could peel something off if it becomes too much.
Yeah.
If you've got some system that basically runs itself, great. Just let it go, or, put minimal maintenance into it. And, if maybe you've got sheep and it's too much to keep up with, either find somebody who wants to take that over, or figure out how to stop raising sheep, sell them off, use that money to invest in something else that works well on that with less effort from you.
Or maybe take your knowledge on how to raise sheep and transfer that knowledge to your neighbor and buy a couple sheep from him, or maybe do a cost share on a couple and then he sells the rest at a profit. Like, transfer the knowledge, transfer the ability to build the system to somebody else. Like, or if you're living around a community, maybe that still happens, but you don't do it anymore. Or like you said, just go, okay, I'm just going to lob this limb off and I'm not going to do it anymore. I remember one year I went on vacation and I thought I had the automated watering on and I didn't. And we were only gone for like a couple of days, but the one bed with a watermelon plant dried out in it really bad. And it had like 4 watermelons on it when we left. And when I came back, there were 3 and 1 watermelon raisin. And that plant literally
right.
sucked the water back out of its own fruit to survive, which I thought was really cool. But it basically sacrificed one of its 4 children, right? And like, that's what we can do on our homesteads. We can design multiple systems in, and as we age, maybe at some point we just say, I'm not going to do this thing anymore. But then we also have to think about, what does that mean? Because those sheeps were lawnmowers,
right?
So now we either need to plan to let it grow in, or we need some way to keep it mowed or something. And we need to be thinking about these things as we develop design, so that we don't do things like design access out, where your neighbor could have mowed it for you with a tractor, but they can't get in, or something like that.
Yeah, because you put swales all around, because sheep can walk on swales, but your mower can't.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly. That's correct. And if you start thinking about your design as you put things in as a web, and Holgram's 8th principle is integrate rather than segregate. You and I typically rephrase that as function stacking.
Yeah.
And if you start thinking about that as a web, a spider web, on a spider web, you can go and you can cut, certain strands. Some strands, if you cut it, it collapses the whole web, but other strands become more tertiary. They're not as important. And if you cut it, it's just a redundancy and everything still functions. Not maybe as well as it did with everything together, but if you design your homestead with that in mind, where you're tying systems together so they're more and more redundant, you taking something out that is causing you a problem or that you don't want to deal with becomes less hard.
Yeah, absolutely. What's the value of learning troubleshooting? To me, it's one of the most important things you can learn. I think that goes back to me being a mechanic. I mean, a mechanic, if you can't troubleshoot, you're not a mechanic, you're a part swapper, right?
Exactly.
Really, that's the whole thing about being a mechanic, is figure out why it's broken and fix it. I could teach anybody to swap out, let's say, a starter motor. In 15 minutes, I can tell you what to do, and then we can do it in 45, and you'll be able to do it for the rest of your life. You can change a tire, you put on a belt, but the car won't start doesn't mean starter motor's bad. It might be the battery. It could be any. There's a whole ignition switch. There's a whole series that you have to work through, and that value is being able to, like, if you know the broken part, fine, but a lot of times you just know it ain't working.
Right. Yeah. So troubleshooting, critical thinking, they kind of go hand in hand. Having the ability to look at something and start deducing what it is that could go wrong, and thinking and eliminating things that it couldn't be based on the facts that you know, and then gathering more facts. So in some ways, one way to look at troubleshooting is, not the science, but the scientific method.
Yeah.
Which is form a hypothesis and then try to prove it wrong, right? So look at the facts of the situation, come up with a few different ideas on how that could happen, and then try to prove yourself wrong. Don't get attached to that idea. And as you learn how to do that over time, your BS meter goes way up, because you start to figure out how different things work. And when somebody tells you something that's not true, you start to go, oh, that's not true because. So troubleshooting, using things like divide and conquer or other methods really starts to train your brain on how to deal with things quickly, how to deal with things logically. And it's vitally important. I think, I don't know if you've ever done a podcast on troubleshooting, but that would be a really cool topic where you just work through, like, here's some problems. How do we deal with them? I mean, like let's think of the plumbing issue. If we think of plumbing, it's linear, it's a line, and you divide it in half and you think about, okay, my pump's always running. What are the possibilities? It could be the pump's clogged, so water's not getting into it. It could be the footer valve's broken, so water's running right back out after it pressurizes in the tank. You start thinking through and dividing the system into segments, and you can do this physically as well. In a lot of water systems that I put in, I always put in valves. And that's so I can shut the system off, isolate. Yeah, exactly. So with troubleshooting, if you can isolate something, then you can determine if it's a problem. So let's say your pump's always running and you turn off the valve that's in the middle of that system and it stops running. You're like, okay, it's not the footer valve. It's not clogged. It must be something's leaking on the other side of that valve.
After this point in the plant, right? That it's this direction, not that direction.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. So, dividing and conquering, thinking logically. And one of the ways to get good at troubleshooting is look at somebody else's property, look at a problem, and then think about how to fix it. Because it's easy to get emotionally attached and not see the forest for the trees on your own property, in your own home. So if you start just as you're driving, it's good to notice things anyways. So start looking for something where you're like, that person could do that better. And then play on that. Think about that. Think about, you see a denuded pasture. What would you do about it if you owned that property? And that will help you start that troubleshooting process. If your mind is constantly working on problems that aren't your problems, you start to develop that skill set without having the emotional attachment or the being overwhelmed because it's your issue. So when it becomes your issue, you're ready to handle it, even if it's not exactly the same.
I know we've done some dedicated shows on troubleshooting, but I think that would be very old school TSP, and that might be a good idea to revisit sometime soon. And I also know that you just gave me an idea for, I'm going on vacation at the end of August, and I always have to do rewinds for that. We did I think it was 2 shows we did on Real World MacGyver, and it was people sending in all of the things that they did in order to get out of sticky situations. And we didn't really talk about it as troubleshooting, but all of it was troubleshooting because you had to figure out what was wrong and how to fix it. For instance, David, his contribution to that was he was somewhere and his car battery died, and he was near ranch territory, and he followed an electric fence down to where the solar panel and the battery was. He borrowed the dude's battery, jumped his car with it. He's a good dude, so he put it back the way that it was. But I mean, he was hell and gone in the middle of nowhere with no hope anytime coming, and he was able to get out of that situation in about a half an hour versus maybe being out there for 6 or 7 hours till somebody showed up, because he wasn't going anywhere otherwise. And that kind of stuff is really valuable. So kind of thanks for that. Now, I do have a question for you. One from the audience. These are pikers today. We ain't getting no audience questions, guys. If you want to get one in, get it in now, because we're going to wrap up soon. But this question is, what is the best way to spread compost extract on my pasture? Spray tank on a 4-wheeler, sprinkler, what?
Yeah, I like, you can get these tow behind. So you get a tank. It could even be a 55-gallon drum that you modify with basically a hose valve or a spigot on it. And then a 12 volt, 40 PSI or 45 PSI, basically a camper pump. You can hook that up to a spray head that you can get fairly inexpensively. And they're usually anywhere from 48 inches wide to about, 90 some inches wide. They've got a few spray nozzles on them. Obviously you want to use a good filter so that you don't get debris in those nozzles, but you can set that up on one of those like yard carts that you can pull behind a lawn tractor.
Yep.
And you can use the lawn tractor's battery to run the pump and just a little switch. So you can either do that, or you can buy a whole pre-made setup. I think Vivor has some setups like that. But there's lots of options, but I do like the pump behind an ATV or behind a garden tractor or something. Yeah, that's a pretty inexpensive way to get that set up and get going with it.
Here's what I have exactly this, except this is a 25-gallon one, and I have a 35-gallon one, and I just quick looked it up at Tractor Supply, so I can't find the one that I have, but it's basically, like you said, it's a poly tank. It's designed to sit horizontal. I have a lawn tractor and I have a trailer for the lawn tractor, and I just throw that tank in that trailer, and it runs off 12 volts. So I just run the alligator clips to the battery on the tractor while it's running and drive around, and I can just spray whatever I want to spray. Now, it's not like one of those, like a farmer has with a lawn sprayer where you're just driving out spraying pasture. But I'm sure you could rig that up. But like I spray all my fruit trees and stuff every year with that setup. And I don't know if they just went up a lot in price since I bought mine. I don't believe I spent more than about $150 on mine.
No, those
bigger than that one.
Those tanks went way up during COVID, and it's just the tank. It's not the sprayer or motor or anything like that. And what you were just showing. So if people are on the podcast and want to look it up, go to the video. But those types of tanks, he's got a wand where you kind of push a nozzle and you spray it in a specific direction. You can get little adapters and like a wide pipe that you mount to the back of it that will spray a wide swath as you drive. So instead of it being directed a specific direction, now you've got a wide bar essentially with multiple spray heads on it that spray as you drive. And that's my favorite way of doing it because you'll get even coverage and you can do it fairly quickly.
And Jesse says, comment, I just want to say, pay attention to the weight with a 50-gallon drum.
Yep.
Yeah. Water's a little over 8 pounds to the gallon. 50 gallons, 5 times 8, 400 pounds. The 35-gallon one I have, when I put it on the trailer behind my lawn tractor, I usually fill it up with about 30 gallons of water. That starts to put a little bit of pressure. If I'm sitting on the tractor with my big ass, it doesn't matter, but you start to see it kind of starting to lift up the even at that weight. I mean, it's a 100 series John Deere lawn tractor. It's not a tractor, it's a mower. Definitely think. And the other thing people should think about when you start talking about tanks of fluid on trailers in the back of trucks or anything else is when you move, the water moves. And when you stop, the water moves a lot. Unlike your gas tank, there's no baffles in there. So it sloshes around. And so the half full tank that weighs less can actually have a greater, like if you're driving around at a Homestead spraying stuff, you're probably not, driving at high rates of, at least you shouldn't be. But, David and I have done things where we've thrown a 300-gallon IBC in the back of a pickup truck to bring fish home in. And it's a little bit of a dicey ride. I'm just going to say when that much water is moving around, the truck can handle the weight, but it's more about the inertia that it's causing. All right, Ryan, before I let you go, I got 2 questions from you from a computer.
Okay.
Actually 3. So this is what AI came up with to ask you in addition to everything we had planned. When you walk a property for the first time, what is the first thing you look for that most people overlook?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think what we were talking about with water is probably my first one. Thinking about what water systems are available, what time of year they're available, how water flows, how that might break up the property, how it might reduce access, things like that. Probably water is the first thing I think about when I step onto a property and when I'm looking at contour maps and things before I go out to it. So that's where I start is contour, but then I'm looking, at resources and structure and access and all that as well.
All right. How do you balance long-term planning with the immediate needs of a working homestead?
I think there's a certain amount of need to resign yourself to that you're not going to, make 100% of your food, especially not off the bat. So it's more about building that percentage and setting things up in a way that you build that percentage of self-reliance over time as quickly as possible and making sure that things build on each other. So it's kind of like interest on an investment as opposed to, trying to get a whole bunch of money right away. If you can start investing money into something, you'll actually make more over time. And that's how I would look at homesteading and how I set up my homestead for the long term.
Yeah, I would just kind of say we look back to our ancestors that settled this country, mostly from east to west, especially before the railroads, that what they did is they brought provisions because there was no immediate need that was going to be met by the homestead other than you might shoot a deer or something, right? Like the homestead had to be built before it could provide any needs at all. And so Yeah, like that's just kind of like you have to go in accepting that, AI is wrong here. You're not going to get your immediate needs met unless
No.
somebody already built it and something's there that's an existing system. And
Yeah.
here's a fun question from AI. If you could only keep one animal on your homestead for the next 5 years, what would it be and why?
On my personal homestead, the caveat is I don't have if people came to my homestead, they wouldn't be like, wow, you do so many amazing things, because I follow my own advice and I don't overdo it. And I'm gone a lot, so I need my family to be able to manage what I have. Like a garden and chicken system, I think, is probably the most productive system that ties together with itself. And I kind of think of those chickens and garden almost as one system because of the way that I set them up. So I think that would be it. Other than that, I tend towards, for ease, I tend towards trees and things where I can plant them, leave them, and when I come back, they're better than I left them.
If I were to answer that question, it would be very similar. I would just say ducks because they're more designed into my system. The chickens require more controls. Right? The ducks are pretty much able to free range everywhere, and they don't mess up nothing because over time I've learned to do it. But I agree with you. Something that's integrated with the garden production. And the beauty of the chicken is any question you have has been answered 8,000 times on the internet, about 6,000 times correctly.
Yeah, and
it's well understood and known, and the whole industry exists to support keeping chickens.
Right. Well, and the phrase that we all use, the problem is the solution, is incredibly true with chickens. What are the two things that people complain about chickens? They're destructive because they dig a lot and they smell, right? Yep. You can fix those two issues really easy by using wood chips. Yep. Because wood chips, you've got essentially a carbon diaper with a lot of end grain for the nitrogen and ammonia to bond to the carbon. And so it does two things. It gets rid of the smells, it gets rid of the diseases, but it also creates compost because the chickens are turning that. And so I literally have never turned a pile of compost in my life because my chickens make my compost for me, and I just go in once a year and harvest it and put it on my garden. So, if you keep the chickens contained, but you give them something to do with wood chips, that basically solves the destructive and smelly problems and gives them an outlet. And then I just let them free range for the last hour of the day once the hawks have gone to bed, and then they eat insects instead of scratching up my flower beds.
And there's a million ways to solve that problem. My grandparents did something very similar, but they did let the chickens out for about an hour before chickens get afraid and want to go back in.
Yep.
Right?
Exactly.
And then that way they might have went around the garden a little bit, but they didn't jack it up much. And the same thing, we were getting compost out of that, which was the honest to God. Of course, this was central Pennsylvania, some of the most fertile ground in the world. That was it. That was the only fertility that was ever added to that garden ever, was just wood chips from the chicken run. And it's occasional little compost that came from the neighbor had a horse. But we would literally throw the freaking horse turds in the run with the chickens.
Yep.
And they would tear them up and integrate it. Also, it was really all just from that one system. Really cool, man. We did have one more question come in while we were answering questions, and that is Tyrone says, what's the best way to drill in a lava rock for a fence post on a desert off-grid property with no access to power?
Hey, I actually have an answer for this, and a good one too. It's called a rock drill, I believe. It's going to be a lot like a commercial jackhammer. Okay. They run off of a diesel air compressor. Okay. And they literally make a head. So it's not just a jackhammer. It spins and blows air through the nozzle. They're not real expensive to rent for a day. I think maybe a $250, something like that. And they have a head that is specifically designed for being the right size for T-posts. So I think it's like 1 5/8 inches or something like that. And so in a matter of about 2 minutes, you can put in a T-post directly into that rock, whether it's limestone, lava rock. Granite becomes a little harder, but as it drills, it's going to blow out all the debris, and you just kind of get a set point for how deep you want that. Sometimes you have to dig the soil out a little bit. It depends. If it's a few inches, it'll just push right through. If it's more, it'll kind of clog things up. So you need to dig a little first, but I've done that to put up all kinds of fences, and it works amazing.
That's one way to do it. The one thing I'll say, if you do that, once you put that fence post in there, it's never coming out.
Yep.
If you don't want it there anymore, I hope you have a torch and cut it off below the ground level so it doesn't put a hole in your tire, because it's not coming, especially once it's been in there a while.
Yes.
It is never, ever, 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 ever coming out without maybe an excavator. You might get it out maybe by breaking the rock. The other thing is, like, if you have places like that and you can't get access to the tool that Ryan just mentioned, one of the things I've seen people do is build wire frames. And if there's a lot of rocks around, just fill the wire frames up with rocks, and those become the posts. So that's another angle that you can take at it. Hey,
it's like a gabion wall.
Yeah, basically a gabion wall. And I've seen people put in, lots of fencing that way, because one thing they have in abundance for free is rocks. And you have a rock party, buy a couple cases of beer, have friends over, build the towers first, and just gather rocks and throw them in the tower. Be careful you don't bring your dumb friends over that want to play basketball with the rocks or something, but otherwise it'll be all right. I have a second lieutenant story that I won't tell today that involves that and diesel fuel. Anyway, Ryan, tell people how they can find out more about you, get in touch with you, engage your services, get information from you, like your YouTube channel, all that.
Yeah. So the place to start is my website, thehomesteadconsultant.com. I've got my contact information there, so you can find it easily. I've got some descriptions on what I do, at least to the best I can describe them, because oftentimes it's different for everybody. But what I do, transparent pricing, all that is up on my website. Some pictures of different projects I've been a part of. You can find links to, that's actually, that's the Meet the Consultant page. Okay,
Yep.
You got it.
Yep.
So yeah, I go through and describe the different things that I provide and what that might look like, as well as, example designs and things that I've done for people on my website. So the other thing you can do is check out my YouTube channel. It's YouTube /@ the Homestead Consultant. And that's also under the resources tab on my website. So I've got videos and things posted up there. So those are the two primary ways. Of course, I'm on TikTok and Instagram, and I haven't set up a Facebook yet, but those are where people can find me. And, my goal is to help people be more self-reliant. So if I can help you and I don't have to go out and do a on-site consultation, a lot of times I'll do a short phone consultation for free. And then if people need more, we can work from there if we're a good fit. And if we're not a good fit, I'll help you find somebody else, or, tell you what I think. Transparency and honesty is really important to me in what I do.
Well, I'd just like to tell you as we wrap up here too, that one of the best things I've done in the past couple of years was add you to the expert council. The knowledge and information you've brought to the audience has been absolutely exceptional and different from what the others have brought, which is good as well, but it's just different. It's new information that's really, I think, helped a lot of people. So thank you to your contribution for that.
Yeah, thank you. That's a huge compliment and an honor. Thanks.
Thanks for being with us today, Ryan. Have a great day, man.
Thanks. You too, Jack.
All right, guys, real quick, I want to wrap up for you. And as I let him go, I saw that Jesse asked a question. He said, how do you do free-range chickens and have them avoid porches and steps? Mostly you don't. You need to fence them out in some way they can't get in. And a rooster will travel 2 miles to shit on your porch. I'm just telling you. One thing we did, we put fencing on our back porch, and we've made it uncomfortable for them to be up here. A good dog, that can help too. If you have a dog that knows chickens aren't allowed on the porch, but you ain't allowed to eat the chicken, that can go a long way. Once that dog runs their ass off there a few times, then they stop coming up there. Anyway, with that, let's go ahead and wrap things up. Want to remind you guys that you can always help support us by doing your online shopping starting at tspaz.com. I don't have specifically an item of the day for you, but as any good author will do, I want to promote my book again, Laws of Life, the System, Design Your Life. It's available on Amazon. I appreciate it when you go through T-Spaz to buy it, but if you're going to buy this book, I really don't care how you do. Just buy it, share it with others. I got a really heartfelt, wonderful email yesterday from a young gal, and I responded to her, and I said, this is the best thing I've gotten this month was this email. she said her dad gave her a copy of this book, and he tries to tell her stuff like this all the time. And she admitted that it's hard for a kid to listen to dad sometimes. And she told me that this book really cleared up a lot of things for her. It's got her very motivated about the future. And that most of it was really easy to understand. But even when it wasn't, the personal stories that explain the principles made them easy to understand. I mean, it was a payday for me, because that is exactly what I was shooting for when I wrote this book. I believe this book can help you if you're 60 years old, but I believe it really can help you if you're 16 years old and have the opportunity to put these principles to work in your life. Again, laws of life: ditch the system, design your life, by yours truly. Please consider picking up a copy of that book if you haven't done so already. And please consider picking up a copy for your friends, your kids, what have you, if you get the chance. And if you've picked it up and you like it, please leave me a review. We've sold a couple thousand copies of the book already. We have about 40 reviews. Even if your review isn't a 5-star review, reviews help a lot. So please consider reviewing it. And I even have one guy on Amazon. I don't know the man, have never met him, but he's been apparently a long time listener. He did a video review that's on Amazon. So if you could do something like that, that'd be taking it to another level. I'd really appreciate it. With that, thank you to everybody who tuned in today. Tomorrow will be an expert counsel Q&A show for the week, and then we will have a Friday flashback, assuming nothing gets in the way of it. It usually doesn't. And we'll do it all again next week. We are, for the foreseeable future, on regularly scheduled programming. Take care, guys, and have a great day.